Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Into the Wild from 2007. And this is a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Into the Wild, I think, is an interesting movie. It's also kind of what appears to be a very messy movie, although it sort of has a method to its madness of messiness, I guess. I mean, first off, you have what this film is about is this young man, Christopher McCandless, I guess. We don't really hear his last name a lot because he takes a different moniker, but basically is he graduated from college. He had good enough grades where he could have gone to Harvard or gone on to bigger and better things or a career, what have you. Chooses not to do that, decides to go off and live off the land, kind of become transient. And there was a book written by someone else about like his whole experiences and using his journals and things like that. This movie is based off the book, and he takes on the moniker of Alexander Supertramp, which is a way cooler name any way you look at it. And he goes off, he meets interesting characters on his way, and he eventually wants to go off and hike in Alaska. This is sort of his journey through America to eventually go to Alaska. Obviously, spoilers, but not really, because there's a book and it's a real life thing. He did not make it out. He did not survive Alaska, although he had quite a long journey the year before he got there after graduating college, where he cashed out his parents' education fund or whatever and used that money to kind of go off and go on this journey. And in how the film presents it, you kind of just see him on this journey, and you slowly kind of learn information. You know his parents are very worried. You know he doesn't like his parents, although it takes you a while to figure out like what's sort of the issue with them. Although they seem a little weird and far more conservative than he is, you don't find out about the true nature of his relationship with his parents and why he would want to run away, how he was as a person before all this, which you get sort of glimpses of. And also, I think the idea of running away from society and giving it all up is very attractive, particularly when you're stressed out, everything's falling apart, and you're just sick of the everyday troubles that bother you all the time. You're like, well, what if I didn't have a fucking job? What if I just went off on the road and became transient? I actually grew up with a lot of kids who went and did that in their 20s, some of which it worked out really well for, some of which did not come back. So this film takes on a bit of a different meaning for me, and not just in the way he did, just traveling on trains, traveling on the wrong train, getting stuck in a town, drug addiction. There are all sorts of kind of traps within this kind of lifestyle that you don't really think about. But the whole idea of someone wanting to do that, and there's times I thought about doing that when I was in my 20s. I never did it, because when you think about the logistics of that, you often go, oh, right, that's gonna suck. But I think when you think about that sort of thing, it seems very attractive, very sexy, so forth. I think what this film is really good at is it's both good at kind of making him look like very cool, like, oh my god, this guy, he's got it, he's on the road, he's into it. And then in other senses, it's like, holy shit, he does not know what he's doing. He is incredibly selfish, and other times it's like the film kind of takes it where like he shouldn't be doing this, he is irresponsible. But I think in other ways it gives him sort of a full picture. Now, this film was directed by Sean Penn. I think I've seen other of his directed films before, but it's been a while. But what I really liked how he did this is because you get a real full picture of this person, Alexander Supertramp, I'm going to call him, since that's what he was referring to himself as, and that's a cool name. Someone definitely has that on Twitter somewhere. You get the full picture of him, where you get scenes where he'll turn down sex with this young girl when he finds out that she's very much underage, even though he did not realize it when he was flirting with her, but he handled it very correctly. And then in other cases, he's almost, taking a bed in a homeless shelter in LA, which I didn't really necessarily agree with, even though he didn't have a home. Or he's doing risky things because he can do them, things like that. But I think this film both criticizes him, but also kind of follows him in the same breath, which is kind of an interesting way to take it. I can see a lot of people portraying him as a far more tragic figure. I don't think he was tragic unless of course the end. And I think when most of these people who do these sort of things, who come from more of a privileged background and decide to go off, not all of them do, but in this case I can relate to kids who would do that, and you'd be like, well, you have every chance in the world, you have a job that you could have lined up for you, or you could at least have a home to go to that's reasonably stable. Although I guess in his case that was not the case. Maybe in these people's cases, if they're watching this now, we'll be like, well, Jim, you didn't realize this, and that's possibly and actually probably very true. But you would just think, and I think people say that to him on the road, like I think Catherine Keener says, you seem a little too loved for this life. That's also the nature of his parents and the nature of people who miss him. Most of this film is narrated by his sisters, played by Jenna Malone, and it also gets into the fact that he's basically just given up all these people who did love him. He's basically just like kind of cast them aside, and what that feels like for them as well, which is interesting. I think you could just ignore that plot at all. Like that could just be completely gone. I'm assuming because I think Sean Penn has kids, I believe, but I can tell you as like a parent myself and so forth, if your kid, it would just disappear and not talk to you like for a whole year, that would hurt. That would hurt a lot. And I can tell that might not be the coolest perspective in the world, and maybe that's not the most warranted perspective in the world as well, even though it's one that I have. I found it interesting he went into that. In some cases, I think the style of this film is something that sort of holds it back, because it almost feels like a rough cut in some sense, but as it goes on, you sort of understand why it's so messy and all the perspectives you're getting and all the full circle. But there were a lot of times I was like, why did you have that? There's a couple shots that I was like, I don't understand the perspective we're kind of showing through this. Was it a line in the book that meant something? It's a reference? Is it just like you thought it was cool? I don't know. I would say more of the messiness works than doesn't. It's also kind of a cool road movie because you get to see various characters going throughout. He meets like Vince Vaughn to Zach Galifianakis pre-Hangover, Catherine Keener and her hippie husband, or hippie boyfriend, driving in a car, and they become major characters. Hal Holbrook, who is a character actor I've always liked. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his performance in this. I think this was the only time he was nominated, unfortunately. He's a great character actor. I thought he was noticeably really good in this. I think any actor who's older, who has a bit of charisma, can sort of play this kind of role, and they can be memorable to a certain degree. But Hal Holbrook brought a certain level of sadness, of understanding, of knowing this kid was probably screwed, and knowing that he couldn't keep up with him and stop him as well. And they did that really well, and in a way that like would be probably how it happened too, which I think made it even that much more powerful. And I think everyone sort of doubts him, but in a way of understanding. You know, I guess I'm closer to all of the people giving him advice's age than I am Emile Hirsch at this point, but I would probably say that to him, but you can't, he seems so determined, I'm sure you can't tell him otherwise. I do like the performance by Emile Hirsch. I used to be a bigger fan of his from The Girl Next Door to this. I think he's actually a really interesting actor, and he was good at kind of playing someone who clearly both thought he knew what he was doing, but also didn't, and through his performance you got that naivete that I think a lot of actors would have wanted to play, the determination of it. And he plays the naivete almost in the same breath that he's playing like that he has some sort of experience, which to my understanding he didn't really have much. Like he went on cross-country road trips in his car and so forth, but I didn't get the impression he had a ton of like backpacking or camping experience or anything of that nature. And if he had very limited experience, that's what seemed to come through. He seemed to be someone who was taking in all of this life that he was going through the America and trying to find, and that kind of wide-eyed kind of optimism, where at the same time like sort of knowing how rough this really is, and trust me, it is. And he was good at portraying that. I thought Emile Hirsch did an amazing job with that. This probably will go down as his best performance. I might like other movies he was in better than this one, but I think it was definitely his best performance. But it is a great road movie. You even get Kristen Stewart in a pre-Twilight. You get a lot of people right before, I guess in 2009, 2008, when you get The Hangover and Twilight and all those things. But I thought Sean Penn did a really good job with this film, to be honest with you. I'm not, I know him more as an actor, dubious character-wise, I guess, him and Emile Hirsch, but I thought they presented this very well. I would say that. I think it's a very good kind of one of these stories. I am a fan of when they do like unsolved mysteries or something, and they show someone who just sort of like disappeared. I'd always sort of be interested in those stories because they have a level of mystery to them. And I think they were able to kind of like go into all the sort of fantasy of that, but also being realistic about it from everything I've heard about people who've done that before. I do feel like it was like probably too long. The death scene was a bit much. It feels like, this was done by Paramount Vantage, which was kind of like the indie or Paramount Classics or whatever it is. And this feels to me like a film of this era that was kind of like, let a director go under a certain budget constraints and let them like make a film like this. And although I think this film actually did pretty well. I was a little surprised on how much money it made, but not a huge amount, but for a film like this. But it just feels a little kind of too rough around the edges. Now, should a film with this protagonist be rough around the edges? Probably. Should we have a really well-refined story of this kind of a character and this kind of a story? I don't know if that would actually be the most appropriate. And I often thought that while watching, I was like, I don't know, this feels like the right movie for this subject matter. Like, I might not like the storytelling, and it might feel like sometimes he's indulging in certain things that, we don't really need this sequence right here. We could have made it more simple or a little more economical or a little better for the story, but it seems like he wants to kind of indulge in that. But he also, wants us to get involved in all these different characters he sees, even like these Swedes he sees by the river and everything like that. But that's kind of the whole experience of what he lived through. So I think in a lot of ways, like we are really getting, or what we perceive to be, since no one, knows, because the guy died, this film was able to sort of capture that, Although I do kind of question, I like the Eddie Vedder soundtrack. I was wondering, since this guy died in the early 90s, did he even know who Pearl Jam was? Did he like Pearl Jam? I also think this film doesn't really call into question, like, his privilege. Like, he came out of a college, he was just going to get Harvard Law basically paid for if he wanted to go into it, and he chose not to. He burns money, and he's like, I don't need that life and everything like that. I don't think he looks at it, and the film doesn't at all really look at the amount of privilege that he is sort of giving away. And regardless of the fact that he needed to go away from his parents, and certainly like that's something that people do, and I understand that, but I think the way he was about money, and like he can just go into the woods and things, that's a privilege a lot of people don't have. And just being able to like burn what seemed to be at least $500 to me seemed pretty unrelatable. And I don't think this film gets into that. And I don't think they really talk about how the fact that he was able to do this after he had a college degree and quote-unquote had his future set up shows a remarkable amount of privilege, which I don't think this film or Sean Penn or Emile Hirsch really deals with this story. They deal with a lot of many issues of it, and I kind of think maybe it was, although this film does try to accomplish a lot and actually gets away with a lot more of it than I ever thought it would, but that might have been something that I kind of feel like it just lets go. And when I was watching it, especially, you kind of forget about that as he's working odd jobs and things like that. I did think about it when he was in the shelter in LA. These people actually need to sleep here, motherfucker. Like, you could call your dad, and if there were cockroaches on the wall, you'd call him and he would take care of them all. You don't need this right now. This should be a line for you, man. Like, that's not cool to do something like that. I would feel ashamed. I know people who have traveled the country and have done that, and I've never felt incredibly comfortable with that, especially when you know that they could pay for a Motel 6 for the night. I don't think that's appropriate, but that's just maybe my stance on things. However, I don't think it really gets into that, although I do understand why he wanted to move emotionally, everything like that, and that's still a warranted perspective regardless of privilege and regardless of the fact that it would be very hard for a lot of people to do that. Both of those perspectives are warranted, but I think it should be noted that they kind of disregard that perspective or don't really regard it very much at all. But it does take on a lot. This film takes on a lot. It takes on a lot of perspectives. It brings in a lot of voices. It is a really good road movie. I will give it that. It was a lot more interesting than I ever thought it would. I was surprised I was asked to review this movie, and I'm still not 100% sure why. I hadn't really seen it before this, and I found it a lot more interesting than I ever thought I would, to be honest with you. I was a little like, is this just like a bigger indie movie from the 2000s? And I think like the idea that it examined it from so many different perspectives, I found kind of actually intriguing, and it made me kind of curious about Sean Penn as a director and Emile Hirsch as an actor, and it made me kind of look at the story in a much more kind of nuanced way than I think a lot of directors would want to do it. So I'm glad that this film was presented in this way, and I find Into the Wild kind of, you step step into this thing thinking of just the fantasy of it. You think of the fantasy of letting go, of going into the wilderness, of walking and just letting go of everything and just going away. And I think this film constantly loves to bend with both the reality and the perception of that, and leaves you with kind of a full picture of what it's like going into the wild. And I don't know if after this film you'd really want to do the same, but it sure is quite a nice fantasy, isn't it? So if you have seen Into the Wild and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was a winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Yeah. I left the plants in because it's Into the Wild, and I thought plants